Afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. We are excited to have you here today. My name is Danifa Wellston, and I serve as the Chief of Staff and Senior Vice President at Complete College America. And we appreciate you joining us for this week with Equity and Justice for All session hosted by Complete College America. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. As you can probably tell when you logged in, all of the attendees have been muted. We encourage you to send any messages or any questions that you have in the chat box. It's the typical Zoom function and functionality, and so we'll be monitoring that and weaving it into the conversation. All sessions will be recorded, and so you will have access to them via the virtual attendee hub through December of 2020. I do want to also share a couple of things that we found to be valuable. We wanted to see all your faces, and so you might sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed by all of that visual stimulation, kind of stimulus. So please feel free to click on speaker view. It's normally in the upper right-hand corner, and that'll allow you just to kind of see the speaker who is talking at that particular time. And so right now I see that, there are numbers still continuing to tick up. I mean, we've had literally thousands of individuals join us over the course of this week. And so we are just excited to have all of you on board with us today. Just a couple of quick reminders you see here on the main screen. If something stands out or resonates with you, feel free to tag Complete College America on Twitter or LinkedIn. Additionally, we'll be using the hashtag Equity and Justice for all together. So hashtag Equity and Justice for FOR all. And I also just want to mention, we've had a lot of opportunities to kind of share some really great content. And so there are a number of videos that are on demand. There are a few that have been going on and are already available in the virtual attendee hub. But today's sessions included features from Indiana. It's kind of an alliance spotlight. And then we also have a specific session that is being sponsored by the ECMC Foundation, who's been a great partner. And it's with Nevada, one of our Metro Momentum Pathways sites. They're talking about policy collaboration and implementation. So if you haven't had a chance to check out any of those, please do so. There's still another session tomorrow on our pillar structure around support. So with all that being said, a couple of one very last quick piece. So you'll get a chance to hear from our panelists in just a few moments, but I want to give you just a little bit of a heads up. At the end of our session, we actually will move into what we're calling office hours, where you get a chance to talk with our panelists. And so if anything really resonates and you're like, oh, I want to talk to this person about that particular subject, the individuals here are in rooms 1, 2, and 3. And so if you are familiar with Zoom, at the bottom, if you have the most updated Zoom, there will be a little link that says breakout rooms. You'll be able to choose which room you want to go to, and you can pop in and out based on the conversation that appeals most to you. If you don't have the most updated Zoom app, you can just put a 1, 2, or 3 in front of your name. Just rename yourself. You kind of hover over your name, click rename, and just put 1, 2, or 3, and then our team behind the scenes will make sure you get into the right room. Good. So let's get rolling. With Equity and Justice for All, we have, there's been a lot of questions about this theme and what it is we're attempting to do. And there are more conversations than ever around issues of equity and the resources that, that need to be shared or provided to the students that need it most. But the kind of complementary piece for us is this concept of justice, because justice is not just about making sure individuals have the right resources. Justice is about changing the structure. And that's what CCA has always been about. That's the game for us. It's about changing structures and designing our campuses in a way that will ensure that the diversity of student needs and desires and the individuals that show up at our doorsteps, that we are ready for them, no matter where they come from. And so that's what this theme is about. That's what this week is about. For some of you, you know that this session is about building equity through structure, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but structure has always been the end game for us. I feel like even as I see some of the people saying hello in the chat, we've got some colleagues that are longstanding members of the Complete College America Alliance, and we've been longtime partners. And then there's some of you that may not have as much kind of engagement with CCA and may not realize that you're doing CCA-related strategies and work and efforts, but you might not have directly connected with us. And so CCA is an alliance of 47 members. So it includes states and systems, and really governors in those states have decided that they want to make college completion a key piece of their effort. And so, want to just kind of give you a little bit about how we do our work in case you are not as familiar. We kind of bucket it into a couple of broad approaches. Most folks know us for our policy work, that CCA Alliance work and the policy advocacy and some of the big groundbreaking reports that we've done, like Time is the Enemy and the 4-Year Myth. We actually have a new report that'll be released next week. It's called Better Data, Better Decisions. And so if you have not yet created a profile at completecollege.org, please do so, and you'll be at the top of the list to get that information. But we also, I think, the work that has really taken place over the past few years is really around our work related to conditions for change and the strategies in ensuring that individuals get help that they need in implementing these strategies on their campus. And that's all done because we have an amazing team. The individuals that are staff members of Complete College America, being led by our president, Dr. Yolanda Wythen-Speed, we are constantly putting on workshops and coaching events and different kind of national efforts, whether it's our annual convening or unique boutique efforts and events around the country in different geographic regions. And I love the fact that our team are not individuals that have just studied the problems, they've lived them. They've worked at minority serving institutions. They've led efforts at institutions like Georgia State. And so the team that you have in front of you from Complete College America, they're amazing, and I encourage you to connect with them. And of course, the work that we're talking about today is around our strategies. How do we conduct needs assessment and help you take these ideas from concepts to actual implementation? And so that is our work, and those are our efforts broadly. When we talk about these strategy shifts, because some of you, might have gotten the email or the blog post, like, we're talking differently about the game changers. I'm going to get to that in just a second, but I do have a quick question, and we're not going to do any super formal, do this in any kind of formal way. Many of you have used the emojis on Zoom. It's normally down at the bottom, but just a quick question, just a quick snapshot of the audience. How many of you, whether you're a state person or an institutional person or just an individual that's working in this space, how many of you are implementing guided pathways or working in some capacity around the guided pathways movement and effort to ensure there's more structure on campus? So just click the little thumbs up, hands up, something like that. Okay, that's what I expected. Just about everybody is doing some kind of work. And when we dig into that question around pathways, what we realize is that pathways means different things to different individuals. Normally in a room or in a conversation, they'll ask anybody, an institutional person, are you doing pathways? They always say yes. And then when I say, what is pathways or what are pathways? Everybody has a completely different definition of what that means. And it's helped our team to really realize that we probably need to be a little bit more clear around how we're articulating what that framework looks like. It's kind of the gift and the curse of creating a movement. Everybody says they're doing it because they're supposed to say they're doing it. But when you really get down to it, there's a lot of nuance in individuals not being served in the same kind of way, a lot of difference in vernacular, and we're not locked into the naming nomenclature. You can call it what you want. We do want to make sure that the key structures are in place. And so I say the same thing when we talk about our game changer strategies that we've been known for. A lot of individuals will ask questions about, oh, I've done the game changers. That's, but my question is kind of like when I talk to my children. I ask my 12-year-old son, have you taken your shower? And he always says yes. But my 8-year-old daughter always looks at him and says, really? Did you really take a shower? And I feel that same way about this work related to pathways and structure. It's like, are you really doing it? pathways? Are you really doing the game changers? And I think I learned this most. I kind of had my own personal Jerry Maguire moment recently. It was within the past 6 months before the pandemic when we were traveling. And I was at a rural institution, and we were talking about these strategies. And one of the individuals came up to me, or a few individuals came up after me, and they were like, "This made a lot of sense. Tell me more about this pathways." And at that point, I was like, there are still so many institutions that have been left behind in this movement. And so this moment that we're in is an opportunity for us to refine and consider the best approaches to serving the most vulnerable, to ensuring those institutions that are charged with designing these structures are, evaluating what's working and what's not working. And so the conversation that has been most frequent over the past couple of weeks since we've talked about modification of our game changer strategies is, really a lot of pushback. What happened to the game changers? What's that going to mean for me? And I like the way that was laid out, and they still exist. However, they are embedded into our set of pillars that we believe to be critical to institutional transformation. And these are those pillars. Those pillars for us, and we've been always talking about it, but we've never structured it in a way that just provides this level of clarity and framing. And so over the course of this week and for the remaining time, you will hear CCA talking about things related to purpose. You'll hear them talking about momentum. You'll hear us talk about structures that need to be in place. And you'll hear us talking about support. All these things are aligned to the student experience. And we want to make sure that we are laser focused on those key things that we believe to be transformational in the institutional efforts as well as the student experience. We made these changes for a few different reasons. I think that definition is helpful. When we laid out the game changers, it was critical because people were like, this is the way I needed someone to lay it out for me. And so focusing on strategy and planning, that's been our strength as an organization. And you have to be able to tailor your approach for different states and different institutions. What these strategies look like, what they're named in different places may be different, but the idea, the foundation of it is key. And we also want to leave space to continue to evolve as new strategies emerge, as new efforts kind of take place. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we understand how each strategy is moving us toward our equity goals. So here it is. In case you haven't caught this already, I'm going to ask my colleagues to put something in the chat if they haven't done so already. So our president, Dr. Yolanda Watson-Spiva, and I shared a more broad overview of the new kind of our intended impact and theory of change and these larger kind of pillars of transformation. And so you can watch that, it's probably about 10 or 15 minutes, and if you want some in-depth pieces. But what I want to show you is that the game changers are still here embedded in this structure. So if you look at, under each column or each pillar, you see different things that we continue to talk about, co-requisite support, 15 to finish, making sure students stay on track if they're part-time students, proactive advising is still critical. All these things are still there. But today we're going to spend time talking about this piece. My colleagues have done some great work earlier in the week talking about purpose and momentum. Tomorrow we're going to talk about support. Today we're going to hone in on this idea of structure and building course and roadmaps that make the path to a degree a little bit more clear. In case you have not had a chance to, have just a little bit of understanding of some of these strategies, I'm just going to quickly just run through some things for you. So when we talk meta majors, we're talking about making sure that we organize our majors, our academic disciplines in a way that makes sense to students. Like how do you kind of put the education or the STEM things or the health sciences together? And if you want a little bit more of a clear view, we want those majors of study to be aligned in a way so that students don't lose a lot of excess credits when they're moving between one of these majors within the buckets. And we want them to make that connection between their sense of purpose. Even though it's not in the purpose pillar, most students are in college to get a job. And so being able to connect the major to the career pathway that they define is an important part of meta majors. We've been talking academic maps for years now. There's a great pre-recorded session with Larry Abel. academic maps are key in this. You know, they're foundational, including the milestones and helping students lay out a semester by semester structure of what that looks like, even if they're part-time and it'll take them a little extra time. That work is important. The piece that now, you know, kind of what's old is new again, is this idea around smart scheduling. We used to call it structured schedules, because now you've got all of these individuals who have lost their jobs. You've got individuals that are changing different institutions, and they're trying to figure out, how can I have some predictability in my schedule? And so we say smart schedules, that's what we're talking about. Making changes that work for our students that we serve, not what works best for us as an institution. And when we talk about, you know, that last piece that is on stackable credentials, transfer is more important now than it's ever been. Just yesterday, Complete College America joined a number of our colleagues from the Scaling Partners Network and kind of talking about a call to action around transfer and the applicability of credits. And you know this is important, you know, and everyone talks about, you know, students are changing institutions. That's key. Too few states have really built this out in the way that it should be done. I say CCA kind of takes a little bit more bold view in this, where if we really want to do this right, we need a national effort. We need to talk about some interstate transfer so that individuals that are in states that border one another can still transfer across state lines and not lose credit hours. All of that means that academic maps are not enough. This has been kind of that GPS metaphor that we've been using for a number of years now. Having a direct route is important, and yes, you have to know where you're going, but what we have missed in this whole pathways movement is we're assuming everybody has the same car going at the same speed, and that's not what's happening. Some people are literally on a bumpy road, some are on a dirt road, some people are not even in a car, they're on a bike. And so the only way you can consider pathways in the 2.0 of pathways is being able to think about how it's affected, how it's being customized for the students that need us most. And so the broad piece for us has been this deeper dive into equity. You know, career exploration is under our purpose pillar. But if you want to say, you know, what should I be looking at when it comes to equitable outcomes? Are you thinking about culture? What are the specific barriers that students of color face? What are you thinking about when it comes to a career? How do we address issues of economic mobility? That's the deeper dive that we're going to get into today. And so if you wanted to kind of just put all this and wrap it up in a nice little neat bow, all the things I've talked about, policy and conditions, and we do this through our alliance, you know, our mission is still college completion. That is our effort, that's our driving, that's our kind of North Star. It has to be done with equity. It has to be done with a large megaphone and advocacy for the things that are working. We have to look at our data and use that to drive our change. But the thing that we had not shared that's always been core to us has been our intended impact and the ultimate social goal. And for us, that's social mobility, it's economic opportunity, and it's racial justice. And so today, you know, I get a chance to bring in and talk with some colleagues, and I'm just excited to have the conversation with these three panelists. Calvin Briggs is the Executive Director of the Southern Center for Broadening Participation in STEM. You know, as an institutional practitioner, you know, a lot of other things that he'll get a chance to talk a little bit about. Linda Garcia is the Executive Director of CESI, the Center for Community College Student Engagement, and CESI has been at the forefront of making sure that we're talking about what's happening in the two-year space and how do we ensure credentials of value. And my good friend Trent Ball is the Associate Vice President for Equity and Access at Southeastern Missouri University. But Trent also has some other experiences I think allow him to have some very important credibility in this conversation around what this looks like. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open up the conversation with my colleagues. And so, Linda, I'm going to go ahead and jump in with you, and I'm going to ask you and Calvin and Trent the same just opening question. So today we're talking about structure. So what's the importance to you of structure in creating more equitable higher education?
Well, Danifu, thanks for the invitation to be part of this. But when I was hearing you speak, I was reminded of two students that we did focus groups with. And at the center, we're here to provide aha moments to community college leaders about what's going on with the student experience. So let me tell you about these two students. There was one student who said, "This is the only place that said yes to me." This was a student of color. And he said, "I've tried other places. This is the only place where they're going to teach me leadership. They're going to teach me how to learn. They're going to even teach me how to dress." I mean, it was just so impactful. The next student was, he came in so excited, entering student, and he had hopes, aspirations, and dreams. And then something happened in the middle of that semester. By the time we interviewed him for the third time, that fall semester, he was saying, "School's not for me. I'm just one of those folks." So when I think of those two students, I think about the importance of structure, how it impacts the student experience. For instance, we just released a report yesterday about the working learner. A lot of the community college students are working learners. Over a third of the entrance students who said that they work, they said with regards to scheduling, it is so difficult to work and find courses that meet with their schedule. They also talked about over half of them, if they're older, non-traditional, this was really difficult. So when we don't talk about structure, this is what happens. Students are not able to progress, able to meet. So there are questions, about when I think about those two students that I just mentioned, or the working learner, how can we make the structure more stronger for these students? Like questions like, in what ways is your college meeting the needs of those who work? Or are we disaggregating the data? Are we looking at subgroups? Who's being left out, as you mentioned, Danafu? I mean, what does the college consider students when they're working in regards to the policies that we're putting into place, the types of courses or when they're offered? If structure is not there, how are we going to help these students move forward? Because again, like I said, they're coming with hopes, aspirations, and dreams, and they're relying on us to help them to get there. They have an end. We may not have an end because this is our everyday job, but they do. And structure will be an important part of their role to making sure that they complete and persist.
Thank you. Trent, why don't you go ahead and jump in? Take the same question, the value of structure.
I think a big part of it for me is how do we disrupt the structure to keep the student in the navigating pathway? So over the course of the years, working with different organizations, and right now I have a chance to work with 14 different universities within the state through St. graduates. So we've been talking about, as Linda said, what's flexible in that structure? Is the structure so rigid that the student doesn't have an opportunity to change classes if necessary or pick up a course when they need to? So we've been having a lot of conversations about offering of courses during your winter time, how you structure your summer. So originally we would talk about, 3 summer sessions, the 4-week, the 6-week, the 8-week. Well, the online revolution turned it into, we have 12 summer sessions because they're much more adjustable for students. But our big conversation with my 14 partners has been, what do you offer during the winter break? Are you offering those key recovery courses at that time period? We went from having 8 on our campus to over 40. But we also talked about that transferability. Can the winter session be just like the summer session? Can I take a class at home at University of Missouri St. Louis, that's 3 hours, and transfer that course back to my campus when I get back there in the spring? So we're having conversations about the flexibility of scheduling courses and the time for it. Another part that I found so fascinating was we're talking about when are we available as professionals for the students. We live our 8 to 5 job, but that working person who had 6 o'clock class gets off at 5 o'clock. They do come in the registrar's office at 5:30, but it's closed. Just having conversations about that. And, so often as staff, we can stagger our schedules. COVID-19 has taught us how to be accessible at different times. So the structure of classwork and the ability to get help is very important, and that your structure exists, but it's flexible enough to be adaptable to our changing student.
Thank you. Calvin.
Well, like Linda said, and like Trent has just informed us, structure is extremely important, especially for students that come from a low socioeconomic background. If COVID-19 and this racial pandemic hadn't taught us anything else, is that we must be willing to change. We must be willing to pivot and change the way we do business each and every day. It is so unfortunate that we were caught like deer in headlights. A lot of academic institutions, 2-year, 4-year, K-12, they did not know what to do, to go left, right, online, blended education. They just didn't know what to do. And I take my hat off to all those institutions that really stepped up and became leaders and actually created new blended types of learning platforms, whether it was through Zoom, Facebook Live, Instagram. They were meeting the students where they were. I mean, some students did not have internet accessibility. So all they had was their mobile devices. So they were able to pivot and create learning systems that you can actually view and conduct your work through these mobile devices. And you know, as well as I do, here in Alabama, we have a large rural community that they did not have access to Wi-Fi. So we had to pivot once again. So we had educators that went out and actually gave up their own personal time to provide learning resources to those communities. So it's a lot of different things we can do, but I think the thing that we have to realize is that we have to be nimble and we have to be versatile in terms of the way we approach student education. And most importantly, it has to be student-centered.
Absolutely. Thank you, Calvin. And I'll just kind of take that same conversation piece and throw toss the baton back to Linda, because I feel like SESI has been kind of pounding the pavement on this for a while, and we're both, just for individuals that don't know the relationship, both Complete College America and SESI are members of the Pathways Collaborative, so a group of organizations that are all working together to ensure that we scale pathways. SESI just rolled out a new publication. They've got a couple of publications that are coming out, but one that really stuck with me was, kind of the learnings from this guided pathways movement. And so I think it's a good opportunity just to kind of have you tell us a little bit about what you're learning, because everyone's been talking pathways for the past, 8 or so years. Everyone's not doing pathways, but they're talking pathways. So what are you guys taking away from this?
Jennifer, this is a first look. We released this report last month, and this is just a first look of what students are saying of how they're experiencing the key components of guided pathways. And so we thought, yes, these colleges have been doing it for about 6 years or so. The ones who started with AACC pathways, there were some colleges that were doing before, some are just starting, but we want to know what's going on. How are students experiencing this? And so we know what we're learning is that the momentum is building. And we say that because when we looked at the data, we pulled the institutional average of colleges who administer this module, but we compared them to those of AACC pathways. There was 30 colleges that were part of that group. And we want to say, what were some of the differences? So let me give you a couple of examples. There was an item that we asked students, were you required to meet with an academic advisor before registering for classes when you started this college? The institutional average of that, of students who said yes, was 68%. We pulled one of the Pathways 1.0 colleges, and for example, that was Pierce College in Washington. You want to guess the percentage of students who said yes to that?
99%.
Yeah, 91%. Not far, Calvin, not far. You were close. Here's one more example. And the example is, we asked, has a staff member at this college talked to you about how long it will take to complete a certificate or a degree? The institutional average is 48%. Here's another Washington college, South Seattle College. They were 70%. So it shows that these colleges, when they're involved in the guided pathways, they are more intentional. There's conversations that are occurring that are more intentional about redesigning the student experience. But what we also learned is that even though faculty are aware of what's going on, that they're aware of guided pathways, and I'm going to share some more data points, 55% of faculty said, yes, we are doing guided pathways. But when we asked a step further, are you involved? That percentage? Only 36% of those said we're involved out of that 55%. But they also say we need more professional development. We need to know how this impacts our role. We need to know what this means for the student experience. But regardless, when said and done, the majority of the faculty believed, even though they were not a part of it, but they knew their college was doing it, that they believed that this would impact student success, persistence, graduation rates. So again, first look, we hope to administer this module again down years because it's going to take time even to scale up. But it's so important to get the faculty involved because when students come to our campus, usually the engagement happens only in the classroom sometimes, and sometimes,
Right.
they come and go. So that's why it's so critical to get faculty involved in the conversations and help them understand what their role is with Guided Pathways.
Absolutely. And I
Dr.
saw something I saw something pop up in the chat, and it was about can we get this data? And so I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to share that report so everyone has access to it. But Linda, you said something that I want to make sure, and I'm going to come back to you, Calvin, in a minute. You said something around the faculty saying, I want to do something, but I'm not involved in pathways. I often wonder whether they even know what the pathways effort is, because they may be doing something, but we get so caught up in naming the language. Are you doing this one thing? And feel like, oh, I'm doing that. When you start building out the components, you find that they are doing it, they are engaged, they just are not calling it the same thing we call it.
That's true. And that's what you said in the beginning. That's right. Vernacular means a lot. I mean, so these data points, they're conversation starters. I mean, the data tells us what, but if we really want to know why, then I would encourage a college, go start speaking to your faculty. And, you
Right.
have some data points here, but determine the why.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of pivot just a little bit, and I hear you jumping in, Calvin, so hold tight for 1 second. Because I know we got a lot that we're going to get to, but Trent, one of the things that we introduced you earlier, but the one thing a lot of folks don't know is that you were the former board chair of COE, and so, the Council for Opportunity in Education. And so that oversees TRIO programs. I'm a TRIO baby. My dad was a director of Upper Bound. And so I've been in these programs my whole entire life. And so when I hear everyone talking about the Pathways movement, I'm like, TRIO's been doing this for decades, and so the issue is not innovation, it's scale. And so I'm interested in how, you're seeing this as an institutional practitioner, but also the high level of the work. I'm interested in how you are seeing this Pathways movement, but particularly these issues around structure impacting institutional performance gaps for the good and for the bad.
Thanks. I was looking at some of the people there, and I also say actually our TRIO director is participating today as well as our learning assistance programs. And one big part of that is our TRIO programs have learned that we have to collaborate on campus, connect to the larger groups. When people say scale, that often means I want you to do some more work, but there's no more money for this or resources for this. We just want you to scale it. You've been successful with a small target population. Now have everybody the same way. And part of that conversation with TRIO is how do we properly collaborate? So like on our campus, we have Students Plus Services serving 200 students who are first year and low income or students with disabilities. And then we have McNair Scholars Program preparing students to go to graduate school. We merged our programs together under one key director to make sure that the movement was seamless, that they had opportunities to actually be in both programs and learn which benefits them the most. We also made sure one period of time to start splitting staff. And so in our grant in 2015, we have a staff member who was dedicated to TRIO and to other students eligible for the program that were not in TRIO itself. So you can't serve everybody. But we start putting staff with the TRIO programs to expand that opportunity. So we had a young man who was a retention specialist for the university, but he also served TRIO as well. And those students that were either waitlist are eligible and there were no slots for them. On the large level, we're talking about, I thought about this when we talked a few days ago. The last grant went in last January, and I did some reading, and I found many institutions and were using your work in their TRIO grants that they submitted, because it gave them a good structure to discuss what we're going to do. Looking at what you shared earlier, through each of the 4 pillars, TRIO will follow through there. From first year experience, corrects report, meta majors, and then that 360 coaching. So we've often done it. This is giving us a chance to really connect it to something, again, that's more national rather than being boutique. Because people often, well, Trill's a boutique program. No, you'll find Trill programs everywhere. You'll find them at Ivy League school with different names. They may not call it SSS or Trio. They'll call it something else, but that's what it actually is. I'm getting more excited about the idea there's such a huge movement to recognize first generation college students across the country. Right now, COE's partnered with NASPA, Center for First Generation Student Success, to celebrate that. On my campus, we're putting together a committee, and we found that over the last 3 to 5 years, 50% of our students coming in are first gen. A large population of our staff, our president, our provost, our vice president of equity, all first gen. It gives us a chance to talk about that and make it personal for them as they see themselves reflected in our incoming students.
Absolutely. And that point that you just mentioned, Trent, I'm going to come back to it because, we talk a lot about who are the individuals driving this equity movement in pathways and in college completion. And so I'll make sure I come back to that. But I want to bring Calvin in on this conversation. Calvin, one of the first strategy under this structured pillar is math pathways. And I believe you are the only mathematician on this panel. And so I'm interested, you've been on campuses and you've been doing work around mapping and meta majors, but your life's work has really been around what you're doing now in trying to broaden participation in STEM, where there's still a significant underrepresentation from Black and Latino students. And so talk to me a little bit about that structured pillar through your lens of someone who's doing stuff at the institutional level and at the state level.
Well, thank you, Danifu. And no, it's kind of hard not to be able to respond to what Trent said and what Linda said, because everything overlaps and weaves together. You can't have this discussion without talking about the involvement or engagement of the instructors and the professors and the staff across the campuses, because everyone has a role to play. I think one of the things that really stood out with me in what Linda said earlier was, how do you get buy-in from the instructors? How do you provide them with the professional development to actually properly advise? And my question to her was, what type of advising system is best for certain types of institutions? Centralized, decentralized, instructor advising, having counselors set up in a central location. So all those things were bubbling up in me when you were talking. So I just wanted to kind of get that out real quick. But as a math person, I think having a structured pathway into a STEM field is critical. All too often, we have students who take unnecessary math courses and they rack up, on the average across the US, I think is about 90 credit hours for community college on average most students get, and you only need 60 to 65 to graduate. That's telling me there's a problem, that students are coming to campus and they don't know which way to go. No one's properly providing them with the guidance, giving them a structured pathway, college or career pathway to their destination. So as a mathematician, my first question when you walk into my classroom is, what's your major? What do you want to do? And I listen to my students and then I direct, because a lot of students come to class not knowing the requirements, the math requirements for certain majors, to be a biology major, to be a chemistry major. And I tell my chemistry majors, if you're a chemistry major, you're a math major, because you take equal number of math courses with the chemistry courses. And so you have to be able to emotionally and socially adjust who you are, and to be able to digest this and prepare and expect what's coming down the pipeline in terms of the academic track that you're going to be on. And I think our students are capable of preparing themselves if we give them the right information up front and we structure that pathway so it fits into their daily lives. So then they're not dealing with urgent things, they're dealing with important things. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely.
Well, if you stop there, I want to add to that.
No, go for it. Go for it, Linda.
Calvin, I absolutely agree with you. Even with Trent, what you're saying, I absolutely believe students don't come to us to fail. They come to us to succeed, but they need some guidance. I just think about my personal experience, first generation. I had no idea that we had to take an assessment. What was that? I graduated top of my cousin high school. Why would I need it? All that stuff. I didn't know what the roadmap. It took me a while you know, but you're right. Students need
And we make a lot of
guidance.
mistakes and we stumble a lot. And luckily,
Yes.
I'm sure you had a Belinda Johnson on your campus, someone who kind of pulled you by your coattail and said, come here. They saw
Yes.
something in you and said, let me show you how to do this. Let me
That's
help
right.
you navigate through this.
Yeah, and Calvin and Linda, what you're both talking about though is, you know, everyone's still talking about this stuff in a theoretical way. You know, you need guidance. You need to see an academic advisor. Yes, we all can agree that's important. What that advisor tells you is equally as important when it comes to issues of equity. You know, having a math pathway structure is good, but if you don't look at who is being underrepresented in these high-paying, you know, kind of most in-demand jobs, then you're going to still have these big opportunity gaps. And Linda, as I think about the individuals who have been coming back to school and are now the majority, which are kind of adult learners and working learners, you know, you're about to do you're doing some new research on that. And so I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, these individuals who are managing these complex lives and how can structure be valuable for them.
Right. And, you know, to take a step more, you know, not just structure, but even content. So when we're meeting with a college or advisor or faculty, whomever the person is, when they're meeting with the student, it's about getting to know that student. There was another student, because we do so many focus groups. I'm reminded of another student. Another student said, you know what? My life is in your hands. You know, I'm coming to you. Oh, that was so impactful when he said that to an advisor. I see an advisor just looking at the computer, but you're not looking me in my eyes. You're not knowing what my story is. And so when I think about the working learner, are we asking those students, are you able to take as many hours as you want? Or, you know, what is your life like beyond the classroom? You know, are we understanding if there's insecurities with these students, you know, whether it's transportation, housing, or just anything else? Are we having those conversations? Because if we have those conversations and if it's designed that way, it's because a college structured it, provided the support to help their staff, their faculty to have it, designed it that way to have those conversations. You know, it's about getting to know the student deeper, knowing who they are.
Right, absolutely. Trent, you and I were having a great conversation, and I think it's consistent with the national data we're seeing. We're seeing decreases in enrollment, specifically at community colleges. And so, you know, you can build this best structure, but if you're seeing fewer students, you know, how valuable is that structure, or is it more critical now than ever before?
Well, I think that transferability, that connection is what's going to be key. But there's a part that we talk about in this that's very critical. Do the students understand in that structure their financial aid, the acclimation of hours? Those are pieces that the structure has to consistently reflect. I think often we catch ourselves in the idea that, you know, Joe wants to go to this institution, we let him in, but is it support there financially and structurally for that student? And everybody knows me knows my conversation with students is always, this is what we need to have you do. I think sometimes we get them into the system and then act as if they've always been in the system. Our touch points are based on what we're used to doing traditionally, not what the student currently needs. And I'll say it out loud. This decline in enrollment we're talking about across the country, that's the decline in first-time, full-time, full or partial pay majority students. The number of students of color who want to access education has not dropped. In fact, it's increased. But do we have the structures in place to recognize what they need to be successful? That's what always concerns me. Community college level, four-year level.
Okay. So Trent, Trent is a friend of mine. We've met through our work doing this college completion work, and he's always a good thought partner to Complete College America. You know what I'm about to say. You know, like we can't pilot our way out of this. You know, I mean, and so like, how do we get to scale? You know, doing one TRIO program is great. Having a couple of institutions doing something is great. We need states and systems to hit all the students and ensure that this is happening for the vast majority. And I think, you know, Missouri has been thinking deeply about this. You know, St. Louis is a new talent hub with the Lumina Foundation. I mean, talk to me a little bit about, because you're also doing some work at the state level. You know, how does this play out when you start to rise into the levels of government?
So 3 or 4 years ago, actually, the state of Missouri adopted the game changers in discussion of performance-based funding. And so those key ones about stackable credentials, about scheduling, became a part of how institutions were going to be evaluated for funding. And so for 2 years, we were all kind of talking about it heavily. And then boom, budgets hit. And my conversation is always, I do not want equity to go the way of music and gym at a public school when things get tight. So we had a chance to have real conversations with our commissioner, and you guys work together all the time. In 2019, she moved from commissioner of Department of Higher Education, also include workforce development and economic research. So it went from a staff of 40 to a staff of 400. And that led to an equity summit that we had last fall, where we were having those really conversations about not just what the work is, but who's doing the work. And we did tiptoe around it. We talked about the fact that you're not talking about yesterday, maybe I wrote the note down. Do we have staff in place that enter the room with credibility with our students? Or are we recruiting diverse students and putting them into a majority system that doesn't reflect what their needs are or understand what their needs actually are? So at the state level, we're having that rough conversation about who's doing the work, who's funding the work. We always talk about performance-based funding, but do we really talk about the performance of those particular students and how that impacts your funding as well?
Absolutely. Calvin, you're doing some work in I mean, I'll let you talk about it, but Governor Ivey is probably our second to last alliance member next to Governor Whitmer in Michigan. And so Alabama, kind of said, hey, we've been a little behind the curve on getting some of these strategies implemented. Let's work together. And so they became the 46th member of the CCA Alliance. Talk to me because, my colleague Brandon said yesterday, I think it might have been yesterday, he shared, I don't know if you know that, next week we've got this election going on. And everyone starts to wonder about what does this mean for higher education broadly. You're in a state that tends to lean a little bit more conservative, but the work is still, impactful no matter where you are, and so trying to think through how you view this through a political lens, or do you even view it through a political lens? Because, everyone's trying to figure out where do they sit and who's going to fund what, and it's going to impact everything. So talk to me a little bit about your work in Alabama and how Alabama is thinking through this.
Now, Danifu, that's a lot to chew on. But
I know, I hit you with like 5 questions at once.
I'm gonna do my best. So of course, the Southern Center, our goal is the realization of equitable access for all students, particularly those students who are in STEM career and college pathways. One of the things that I always encourage my colleagues to do, whether you're on the K-12 level, whether you're in the classroom, out of the classroom, higher ed, you have to be a leader in your particular area. You can't sit on the sidelines and allow other people to sit at the table with policymakers and kind of drive your destiny as an educator or drive your destiny as a learner. You have to be at the table when the deals are being made. And so I encourage a lot of my colleagues here in the state to join the course of study committee, where we just submitted the course of study back in 2019 and it was adopted by our Board of Education. And I have to say, I'm not going to talk politics, but it was a little bit of a political football at times because we were restructuring math pathways. We felt that math, if you're in the 6th, 7th grade, you should understand the pathway to being a doctor in 6th grade and understand the courses you need to take starting in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, which course you can take. And we know students at that time will possibly, I'm just guessing, possibly change their mind along the way. So there needs to be some flexibility in that pathway for students who decide they want to change their mind and maybe go into law versus going into STEM, a STEM field. So we created some variation. One of the other things which I know is CCA's pet peeve, algebra. Should everyone be taking algebra? And the answer to that question is no. So what do you substitute? Do you restructure what algebra really is? Is algebra about X's and O's, or is it about logic, critical thinking skills? So if it's about critical thinking skills and problem solving skills, is there another course that fits the bill, that provides that same type of structure and framework that we can direct students to? And the answer is Absolutely. So here in Alabama, we decided to restructure math pathways in the K-12 system. And not only did we do it for K-12, we also provided guidance to our higher ed colleagues on how this guidance could be carried over into the 2- and 4-year environment. So, and that also takes me back to what I just read yesterday. A beautiful statement from Betsy DeVos. I don't know if you read her statement yesterday, but a report came out and she shared a couple of highlights in the report. And she said that, of course, we're not doing that well in math and science and reading, but disadvantaged students are doing far worse. And her quote was, the amount of money that we've been giving institutions hasn't seemed to be working. So we need to do something differently. And I was thinking to myself, she needs to be connected with CCA and Danifu and all the folks there to get a better understanding of what needs to be done. Because I thoroughly understand that if she had a plan, we could actually make a dent in what's actually going on in terms of students' literacy scores, reading scores, and mathematics scores across the state of Alabama and the United States.
Well, that's a good point, Calvin. And I'm going to bring in just a couple of, we've gotten some messages via the chat, and I think this is a good segue. Our keynote speaker was one of our board members, Estella Bentham, and she talked about many of these strategies inherently that we're talking about in these pillars are inherently anti-racist. The problem is that the equity issues have to be addressed in the pedagogy and in the curriculum. It's like who gets served and how are you doing it and how are you changing the thinking to serve the students where those institutional performance gaps remain. Very interested in any one of you jumping in and kind of talking a little bit about that concept of making sure that we are serving the most vulnerable in this process.
So just really quickly, I'll start us off. So we just submitted a roadmap, a STEM roadmap for workforce development to Governor Ivey. Governor Ivey, through executive order, formed a STEM council here in Alabama. The STEM council is going to be housed in the Department of Commerce, not in the Department of Education, but the Department of Commerce, because we're trying to develop relationships with folks in workforce and in industry to come up with new ways to help increase the number of underrepresented minorities going into STEM related fields. So the entire framework of that report was framed in access, diversity, and inclusion. Every single recommendation we made had to include diversity, access, and inclusion in the recommendation. So
absolutely,
I think we're well on our way.
Gotcha. Linda, Trent, either of you want to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I'll briefly mention. So we partnered with OCCRL, and we have some equity tools. It's tied to the Guided Pathways Pillar 4, ensure students are learning, because we found that there needs to be more support, especially with the equity conversations. So if you go to our website, ceci.org, you're going to see tools about equity in regards to, are we providing an equity-minded approach to teaching and learning? Are we even doing an equity-minded syllabus for our students? How do we have these conversations with mid-level leaders? And how are we cultivating equity in our conversations with students? Are we taking their culture into consideration, especially into the learning objectives? So I invite you to go to our website. Those tools are on our website, and it provides you examples on how you can implement that at your campuses.
Trent,
I'll jump in on the last piece. We
go for it.
Stainless graduates, we had an institute last fall. I mentioned the state did the Equity Summit. 2 weeks later, there was an Advanced Racial Equity Institute that we had about 80 to 90 participants, faculty members and staff across the state. And that led to having a real conversation about equity as a state at these organizations. That led us into what we call the post-secondary equity network. So we've been regularly having real conversations and driving toward getting that plan off the ground and actually implement it. So many of us have a diversity plan, equity plan sitting on the shelf. We challenge the institutions to pull those off the shelf, bring us policymakers, let's have the conversation. So our long-term goal is to make sure that by spring and summer, everybody is really deep into their plan and actualizing it rather than just discussing it.
Oh, okay. So Trent, I'm gonna go ahead and pivot in this last question. And I want you to start it, and Calvin and Linda, I want you to jump in. You know, everyone's talking equity. You know, not everyone is doing equity. And, you know, it's almost like the same way we go down the road with, you know, some of these larger strategic or strategies. You know, it's kind of like these students have these problems, you know, and, we have equity issues. No one ever turns the mirror on themselves and says, this is the problem our state is having. And if I can be very candid, you know, it's always interesting to me that there are few faces that represent the communities we're seeking to serve that are at the forefront of many of these things that we're talking about. And so who drives the equity agenda? You know what I'm saying? Who should be involved in that conversation? Who should be leading those efforts? I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Trent, and then Linda and Calvin will allow you to kind of piggyback on that really quick.
Well, I'll go straight in. During our post-secondary equity network conversations, we brought it up, and my comment was, we can't have the same people driving the bus into the ditch, pulling it out. And so we have to look at who's doing the work, who represents the populations doing the work. So often, back to early statements you shared with me, entering with credibility. When I look at the table and the table doesn't look diverse, I don't have full faith that there's full understanding what needs to actually occur. So the challenge is in pushing my colleagues, because what I see happening is something we all do a great job of loving up on and talk about the greatness of the students. But who do the students always talk about? Those key staff members that help them, that work with them. So as you mentioned earlier, we do a great job talking about theory, but practically speaking, do we have people who have done the work at the table planning the next level? We don't have that. You continue to have esoteric ideas and great theories and great systems of change, but the people who practitioners done the work need to step up. So I always tell my staff and my colleagues, you are practitioners, you are clinicians, and your work is just as valuable as the theorist. So we got to get more people at the table who've done the work, because what I see often, even within my own state, I see a few dots here and there that are doing multiple jobs at the same time. So when you have that multiple work, you get pulled to the little work all the time. So they have great titles, but not great resources and great access and great ability to make policy. So I'm always thinking things are suspect, honestly speaking, about that.
Calvin or Linda, either of you want to jump in?
I'm gonna let Linda go first.
Yeah, okay, so here we go. So Rob Johnstone, he's at NCCI, oversees that. He did some equity tools, and I really appreciate he did this. He got 2 presidents. Michael Baston, we know he's one of our friends. He wrote a piece about how do you have these conversations of a person of color. He got another president from California. How do you have these conversations being white, you know, and how do we have those hard conversations? But really, it's about students want to see people like them. And I'm just going to throw a Hamilton lyric out there. You know, we want to be in the room where it happens, you know, because we've been doing that work, but we need an opportunity to really express that and show, you know, it's all about listening to students and what their needs are and where they're coming from to relate to them.
Absolutely. Calvin, you'll have the final word on this.
Listen, you know, we could talk about structured pathways and talk about academic roadmaps. We could talk about smart schedules, but the real important part of this equation is who's doing the guiding. I mentioned people like Belinda Johnson. We could talk about institutions where we have these memorable professors and teachers at Clark Atlanta University, people who guided us and ushered us through the system and gave us a better understanding of mathematics, physics, and science. It's the person. And usually the person who's doing the guiding, there's only 1 or 2 individuals that are doing it. So what we really need to focus on is building capacity. How do we build capacity and get more individuals who are passionate about the work and have a desire to do the work? And, you know, I have to take my hat off to the folks at CCA for doing such an astounding job, because if you weren't passionate about doing this work, it wouldn't be getting done.
Thank you so very much, Calvin, and thank you all. I want to be able to appropriately pivot, because I think that this conversation, we're just scratching the surface, and each of our panelists have offered their, or have been willing to spend, you know, roughly about another 25 minutes or so talking about their particular areas, their particular work. And so just as a reminder for those who might have joined a little later, each panelist, so if you look at Calvin Briggs in room 1, Linda Garcia in room 2, and Trent Ball in room 3, in a few minutes, in just a couple minutes, and I'll tell my colleagues not to switch us out yet, we're going to allow you to basically move to the breakout session that you're interested in. And we're just going to have a free-flowing conversation. I'd encourage you, if you're able to, please turn on your video camera. We've got a CCA staff member who will be in the room kind of helping to moderate the chat, whatever. But it's really kind of like at the end of a conference where sometimes you get up and talk with a colleague and you just want to talk to them a little bit more and ask a few more questions or say, this didn't really get answered for me, or what is the best resource. You can catch up with either one of them during this particular time. And I also want to make sure that I say a couple of quick things about how you can reach Complete College America. This is our work. This is our mission. And so we're excited about everything that you continue to do. If you have not done so, please make sure you set up a profile at completecollege.org. I mentioned we've got a new publication coming out next week, but there are also a vast amount of resources that you can get that are free, that you can tag the most critical learnings and things like that, so you can always find them in the most simplistic way. So thank you. If you could please join me in giving a virtual hand clap to our panelists. And what we're going to do right now, as I mentioned, is you can either put a 1, 2, or 3 in front of your name if you're having any problems. Otherwise, what we're going to do is transition to our breakout sessions. We will conclude at that point. Thank you.
For some
For
reason,
everyone who's still here, please be patient. We're moving you. If you just put a 1, 2, or 3 in front of your name, we'll move you. Or if you scroll to the bottom and see breakout rooms, there's a little icon. You can click on that icon, and it'll allow you to go directly to the session that you prefer. Hey, Stephanie Gardner.
Good morning.
And for those of you that are still here, you may be here for a reason, and so we'll give you a second. This is kind of our general meeting room where if you got any questions about work that's taking place broadly, my colleague Nicholas Hewitt, one of our strategy directors, is on the line, as well as a few of my other CCA colleagues. So if you got questions about projects that you're working on, ways that you may want to try to partner with Complete College America or anything else, let us know. We'd be happy to answer any questions for you. STEM is in room number 1, if I'm not mistaken. Room number 1. And we know that some of our colleagues sometimes are moving between meetings and have other things going on. So CCA team, remaining folks that are not staff, you're welcome to just place them in one of the breakout sessions.
Conley, I see two more folks who
Yes.
requested.
And yes, Yvonne has been asked to be moved to room 2, please.
And Larry to room 3.
Yvonne, there's a message in the chat to you, and it says, please navigate to,
Yeah, so
please navigate to the more button, and then accept the request to join breakout room 2. So it's at the very bottom of your screen. If you click on more, then there'll be a request to join breakout room 2.
And Larry.
Is Larry still trying to get moved? Larry wants to go to room 3, Yvonne to room 2.
So I think that at the bottom of your screen, there should be options, and sometimes there's ... If you click on the ... there might be an option for you to accept the request for you to move to the room, the breakout room.
So, Nicholas, tell me more about Complete College America.
Well, what do you want to know?